Have you ever wondered what it's like to work in law enforcement? Here on Behind the Star, we share stories about the Orange County Sheriff's Office, Central Florida's largest law enforcement agency. From forensics to dispatch to the deputies on patrol, we'll talk to the brave men and women who protect our community. This is Behind the Star, the official podcast of the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Welcome to Behind the Star, the official podcast of the Orange County Sheriff's Office. I am your host, Jon Busdeker, the official storyteller of the Orange County Sheriff's Office. And thanks again for listening to our podcast. I'm actually really excited about this episode because I've actually had a lot of people ask about this particular unit at the Orange County Sheriff's Office. And so I'm really excited to welcome Missy Roughgarden and Mikayla Overholtzer. Did I say that right?
Yes.
All right. They're both in crime scene investigation forensics. You're both crime scene investigators. And I will tell you, I've had a number of people ask me about this specific unit, so they have a lot of questions for you two.
Sounds great.
It's going to be great.
All right. So why don't we start off by explaining what exactly do I call it forensics or crime scene investigators or CSI? Which one should I call it?
Whichever one you like. We respond to everything.
Yeah.
All right. So what exactly is forensics? What do you guys do?
So we respond out to crime scenes to document both photographically through our notes, the scene itself, the evidence located on scene. We identify and either process or preserve the physical evidence present, and then we also take it back and are able to process for DNA and fingerprints back at the office.
Okay, so Missy, tell me then, what kinds of crimes do you get called out to? Is it a little bit of everything, or are there certain
It really
things?
is. Yeah, it's a little bit of everything, like from death calls, robberies, burglaries, just like anything we can respond to help and preserve evidence and collect it, to process it, to try and find the people that are committing the crimes.
And I would assume since Orange County is so big and large, you two stay pretty busy.
Yes.
Very definitely. You could be called to one side of the county and then have another call on the other side. And
Yeah, sometimes at night we just go from call to call to call, and we just keep going until everybody is calmed down a little bit.
And luckily, it's not just you two in the department. How many people
No.
work in the unit?
we have about 20 investigators, right? Including...
Yeah, we have 12 full-time CSIs and then 4 supervisors over the CSIs. And then we have an additional unit that does all the behind-the-scenes firearms, biology, and imaging. So we have about 22 people in the unit.
All right. And so we're going to get into all the things that you do. But before I get that far, I want to find out how each of you ended up in CSI. So I'll start with you first, Mikayla. How did you end up in CSI?
I am originally from Montana, and so I got my bachelor's degree at the University of Montana. And then I moved to Florida to work at Disney.
Really?
Yes, for a year. And then I
Not too many forensics going on at Disney, though, right?
No, not so much. And then I got my master's at UCF, and I was actually an intern here for a summer, and then I got the job that fall and was able to continue on here.
So what did you get your undergrad and your master's in?
Forensic anthropology, so bones, decomposition, and the study of death and dying.
Okay, so, all right, so that's very, very interesting. How did you end up at Disney then? Where does that play in?
I didn't have anything to do for a year, so decided to go play and work at Disney for a year.
What did you do at Disney?
I worked at Pirates of the Caribbean.
No, they got bones and stuff
Yeah,
there, right?
totally. For sure.
Super realistic.
Yep.
So after that, you came to work here at the sheriff's office.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So how about you, Missy? How did you end up here at the sheriff's office?
So I went to high school in Georgia, and I was interested in forensics and crime scene from kind of an early age. It was actually from watching CSI shows with my mom, which is funny because now we know that it's
just like that.
completely not like that
Oh,
whatsoever.
it's not like that.
But at a young age, it was a good inspiration to get me thinking what I wanted to do. And there was actually no schools in Georgia that had forensics programs or anything.
Really?
No. So it brought me to UCF, and I have a a bachelor's in forensics with a minor in chemistry and a certificate in crime scene investigation. And I did my internship actually with the Polk County Sheriff's Office, and then it got me like applying all around Florida, and I ended up here.
Okay, all right.
Which
so,
I love.
So both of you had an interest in this at an early age, and now you're actually doing this as your career.
Yes.
Yep.
All right. And so so you mentioned that you got interested from CSI. Is that the same with you, Mikayla?
Yes, many hours were spent watching CSI throughout my childhood.
All right. Well, that's good. I mean, you're right. It's not like how it is on TV in real life, but it gets
No.
people interested
Yeah.
in the actual job. And I'm sure that's happened to a lot of CSI investigators or CSI folks across the country.
Oh, yeah. It's actually something that plays into a lot of our cases. We have the CSI effect throughout juries where they want the DNA, they want the fingerprint match because that's what they get on TV. So
It's just not realistic.
It's just
in
not
most
realistic,
cases.
but it definitely has people interested in talking, and people just want to know more about what actually we do.
So let's talk about what happens on a case or when you get called out. So let's just say it's a death investigation and you get called out. Walk me through the process. What happens?
So the call come in usually from the comm center, and we'll get the call, and then usually we'll contact whatever detectives that's been assigned to the case to get a little information on like where we're going and any details they have on the actual scene, and then we'll respond and we'll take photographs, document the whole thing photographically, and then just kind of go from there. It's really a case-to-case basis. Like, there's not a like super general like this we do every time, except for like you're always going to photograph every scene you go to.
So when we say death investigation, that doesn't necessarily mean homicide. It can be anything,
No.
right?
Yeah, we have a lot of natural deaths, overdoses, suicides, as well as homicides.
So when you get called out to those, is it the same sort of process? Let's say they think it's a homicide, or they think it's a suicide, or that maybe they know it's a suicide. Is it the same process, or is it different?
There's a different level of intensity in terms of what type of equipment we'll normally bring out to document. So for homicides, we have a 3D scanner. We'll actually document the scene with our 3D scanner, whereas other cases will go by based on what's present, and we'll go based on the physical evidence. If there seems like there could be a question, we'll bring out more equipment, more personnel. But typically, it's pretty much the same process.
What does the 3D scanner do?
It shoots out a laser in 3 dimensions, and actually creates a diagram of the scene that includes everything that the laser will bounce off
That's
of.
very CSI.
Yeah,
It's very
it's really cool.
Yeah.
And you do that mostly for homicide cases, or is it anything?
Any sort of major scene that could result in a death, typically. So
Mm-hmm.
any sort of traumatic injury that is questionable that might result in a homicide, we'll go out and use the 3D scanner.
So I've talked about this on some other podcasts as well. I've only been here at the sheriff's office about 3 or 4 months now, and what has really surprised me here is that I get emails every morning about what's kind of going on in the county. We get updated, and I'm always so surprised of how many people die of natural causes or not natural causes, of suicide, of homicide, of overdose, mostly overdose. And a lot of these things never make the news. And so I've just had to come to realize, like, every day I'm going to get another email that says, 45-year-old white female was found unresponsive. Do you have to go out to every single one of those?
Generally, most of the time we do. Any unattended death we'll have to respond to. Some of the like natural deaths we wouldn't, but that's only if whoever is deceased, if they have had medical care and their doctor will sign off on their death, then we won't respond to anything like that. But yeah.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you go out, you sort of walk through this process. What are you looking for when you get to a scene?
A lot of times it's what seems out of place. You typically know when you go to a house, the chairs are going to be at the table, the bed is going to be made or unmade, but not thrown across the room. So you're looking for things that are out of place that seem abnormal. And so we document photographically and then through our notes, and then we'll make sure that anyone who normally knows this person, that if that is a typical behavior for them or if it's something that's atypical, and then we'll proceed from there. Also, any blood or saliva, anything that seems out of place in that term.
So how do you collect that? Let's say there's blood on the ground or saliva or other bodily fluids. How do you collect those?
For collection, we use swabs. So we have 2 swabs, and we'll take a sample of whatever location, and we note that in our notes where it came from and photograph it, so we can say this was here, and we took a sample of it, and now we can have it tested if it needs to be tested.
So Mikayla, are you all suited up when you go in, or how do you have to like get prepared to go into all these houses?
It really depends on the scene. If it's something that's very questionable in terms of this is a homicide, we don't know what could have been touched, that type of scene, we'll Tyvek up in our little bunny suits. They're white, they look like painters. The news loves to get us like that. But we'll go in full Tyvek up until we can determine the scope of the scene. And then for other cases, it's on a case-by-case basis. If there's not really a whole lot going on, or if it's outdoors, typically no.
Yeah, and I want to get to the outdoor stuff in a minute, but back to the inside stuff. Missy, when you're in there, is it like how I do see on CSI where they're dusting for fingerprints and spraying all these chemicals and people are like, oh, I know what happened, or is it just way different?
That's really a case-by-case basis. There are some cases where we go in and we have to use every single processing technique that we've learned through training and our experience, and we could be in there and we could be swabbing, we could be dusting for prints, we could be processing the floor for footprints and shoe tracks and all this stuff.
How do you do that?
So it's actually pretty similar to the fingerprints for the shoe impressions, like on a regular floor. You can use the black fingerprint powder, and you can put it on the floor, and then we take very detailed photographs of it, and then we have they're called gel lifters. They're pretty similar to our fingerprint tape, but they're like kind of squishy. They're like foam on top, and we put that down, and we can preserve that like shoe impression for analysis.
So this is all collected, and how long does it usually take? We'll say it's a homicide. How long does it usually take to get all the evidence?
If it's a very complex scene, we could be there for 8 to 10 hours, a couple days. It really depends on how much is going on in the scene. Because if it's like a particularly large scene, it's going to take significantly longer. If it's a fairly small scene, even if there's a lot to do, it doesn't take as long because it's just not as large.
Yeah, and so you're collecting all this evidence. Is it for the investigators? Is it for the trial that might happen later? Where does all this evidence go, and what are you doing with it?
So generally we're collecting evidence to then be processed back here at our office. So we'll do more detailed processing and to have it sent to FDLE, which is the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, and they do like biology testing, chemical testing, and they do firearms analysis and all that stuff for evidence that we collect at the scenes.
And we do some of that here,
Yes.
but they do it maybe a little more extensively. This is up in Tallahassee, correct?
We have one here in Orlando.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. I did not know that.
Yeah, there's a few throughout the whole state.
Okay. All right. And so that's a months-long process sometimes. It takes a while to get some of this evidence back?
Yeah, typically we process our evidence for large cases like homicides fairly quickly after the incident occurs, and then we get it over to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. But the process for DNA analysis is a very long one, and so it can be a few months before we actually get results back.
And I know you do a lot of work out of the building, but you also do a lot of work here at Central Ops. If you're not familiar, Central Ops is at John Young Parkway and West Colonial. It's kind of the headquarters of the sheriff's office, but there's a lot of work done here too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
What do you do here? What are some of the things that you do here at Central Ops?
So like speaking of like fingerprint processing, we can do more extensive processing. So if we have items that we know we want to process for fingerprints, we can bring them back here to our office because we have a cyanoacrylate chamber, which is like a super glue chamber. You can put the items in it.
All right, talk about that.
So it's pretty cool actually. So you put the items in the chamber. It's a vacuum chamber, and you put anything that you want processed in it. Usually like they're non-porous items, so like you can put cups, you can put lots of things in there, and you put the super glue at the bottom of the tray, and it superheats it, and then it'll adhere to any prints on your item, and then you can it fixates the prints, and then you can do like multiple types of processing on it. So you can still put your black powder on there and take lifts, but you can also use chemicals that will react with the glue on the fingerprints, and then you can photograph those.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So it's like a more detailed way or just a more high-tech way to get fingerprints?
Yes, it allows us to be able to use more than one processing method. So if we have a table on a scene, we're clearly not going to be collecting it, so we'll just black powder it. But you only get one shot. Because once you black powder it and lift it, they're pretty much all of the oils in the fingerprint are gone.
Really?
Yes. So we train a lot so that we don't mess it up. But when we have objects we can actually take from the scene, the cyanoacrylate chamber actually allows us to be able to use more than one method. And if something were to happen, it gets a little smeared with the powder, we are able to powder again.
Oh, okay.
Because it's something we can continue to use.
Is this a newer thing, or has this been around for a while?
It's been around for quite a while. It used to be in fish tanks with a little hot plate inside, and we've now advanced to actual large machines that can run for ever, basically.
So with these prints, are you trying to match them up with other prints that are in, like crime data or crime, I don't even know what it's called, like a database?
Yes, we have AFIS, which is the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, and we have our own latent unit here at the Sheriff's Office. And so we will lift the latent, put it on a card, label it, and with the pertinent information, and then we send it to them, and they actually do the analysis and put it into the system, and then they'll send us a report back based on if our latents are of value or if they're actually able to make an identification.
So I know we alluded to this earlier. Not everybody, and I apologize if we're only talking about homicide right now. We can talk about other things in a little bit, but they happen here in Orange County, and that's what you two help investigate. And so they don't all happen in air-conditioned homes.
No.
So,
most of them don't, actually.
So maybe tell me about that. How is it different when you're investigating a crime scene that's inside compared to outside?
It really depends on whether or not the house has air conditioning, because a lot of times they don't. So inside, when there's no air conditioning, it's pretty miserable. We have to go and take lots of breaks to go back to the air conditioning because we can only work so hard for so long in heat exhaustion. But basically, it's the same process. It just takes a little bit longer if it's air conditioned or not air conditioned.
But if you're outside and you're dusting for prints, there's wind and bugs and rain, and like, how do you do it outside?
You want to collect the pertinent evidence, the DNA evidence first, because if it does rain, then you lose it. So all of the evidence that can be harmed by rain will be collected almost immediately. So you photograph it, lay a marker, collect it. Whereas with other scenes that are indoors, like we'll have the 3D scanner go first, and like before we collect anything, before we toss and search and do everything we do inside. But outside, we'll make sure that everything that we can do before any sort of environmental conditions happen is done.
Okay. So, Missy, is it more difficult then to get, I guess, results when it's outside?
Maybe not necessarily. It really just depends on like the length of time between like, let's say at the very least you're trying to identify somebody. If they're outside versus inside, they could have been outside the whole summer. They could be decomposed. You could be trying to like just figure out who this person is, and maybe that might be a little more difficult because if they had been inside for the same amount of time, maybe they wouldn't be as like drastically decomposed. You could still find something in there to identify them.
Plus, you might know whose house it is because they live there. But if you find them in the woods, it can be more of a challenge.
Exactly.
So how do you do that? Let's say, because it is very hot here in Orlando, in Central Florida, and this happens where people are found, maybe their bones are found, whether or not it was a homicide or not, their bones are found. What do you do? How do you try to find out who that person is?
If they still have fingerprints present, we've actually used the rapid ID technology that the deputies carry.
We should talk about this. That we have some technology here that helps identify DNA quickly with new technology.
Yeah, we actually now have an Andy system which does rapid DNA, and we're able to put it in a known sample to create a DNA profile. And if we have a known sample to compare it to, we can identify them that way. If they still have fingerprints present, they'll do fingerprint analysis to determine if there's anybody in the system, and that includes government workers, anyone who's ever been fingerprinted. They're able to use that to identify them. But from there, they'll do, if it's fully skeletonized, they'll do a anthropological analysis with one of our anthropologists here at UCF, and he'll determine the gender, the race, and the approximate age range for the individual. And then if that still doesn't get us there, they'll take pieces of bone for identification.
Okay. And then they might be able to figure out who it is, but I'm sure there's a lot of instances where it's just we don't know.
unfortunately, that's definitely a possibility every time that we go out to one of those scenes.
So now that we've asked a few of the more questions about sort of the process. I have some questions about. I'm not super squirmish, but maybe a little bit, and I just don't think I could do what you two do. I mean, you go to some scenes where, as you said, bodies are decomposed from recently maybe deceased to been deceased for a long time. How do you deal with that? I'll start with you, Missy. How do you deal with that?
I mean, I don't know. You kind of get used to it. Like in training, it's a little rough and you might not be used to it, but it's something that you have to deal with. And if it's something you can't do, then you just can't do the job.
This ain't a job for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty much, it's not something you can be like, oh, I'll get, you do get more used to it, but you have to, it's not something you can't get over, because if you can't get over it, then you can't do the job.
Is that the same for you, Mikayla?
Yeah. Being an anthropology major, my thesis was on decomposing things.
Really?
So I was able to get used to it a little bit prior to this. And then on my internship, my first call out ever was a guy who had been in his apartment for about a week. So that was real rough, but you do get used to it.
That was your first call?
Yeah, as an intern. So that was the first time I'd ever actually been with a dead person, which is always a unique
that's
experience.
pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So did you have to psych yourself up for it? Like I'm gonna see something that I'm gonna see for the rest of my career. I gotta be ready for this.
I mean, you go into it and you're like, okay, he's just gonna be there. It's not gonna move. And then you walk in, you're like, oh, this is weird.
Is it way different than what you thought?
I mean, you walk into it and my interpretation was going to be oh, he's just going to be laying there. It'll be on the floor. It'll make sense. But then they're in weird positions and things like that. And you just kind of have to get used to the fact that people don't plan on where they're going to die. So they're just going to fall how they fall.
Was that a homicide or was that a?
It was a natural death.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Older gentleman or younger or?
I think he was younger with a medical condition.
Okay. All right. Wow. And so is it once again, my whole reference is the movies and TV. I've never done this job, nor do I want to. When you walk in, is it, like you said, it's hot in there? I'm sure it smells really bad.
Yeah.
How do you just get prepared it's going to smell in here?
Yeah, you just walk into it knowing, because usually the deputies are outside and they're like, "Whew, you're going in there?" And we're like, "Oh, great." But the thing that I hate the most is typically the flies, because they're all on there and they want to land on you.
Really?
So then there's that transfer of them to you, and that's.
Yeah, honestly, the flies are much worse than the smell every time.
Really?
Yeah.
I never even thought about the fly. I've seen, and I shouldn't compare the two, but I live in a house where every now and then my cat will kill a mouse, and yeah, there's flies all over it, and so of course this is going to happen to humans as well, and so yeah, you show up and they're all over it,
and they could be all over it.
Yep.
So yeah.
So what do? Do you just shoo them away or
mask up typically,
Yeah,
and then just shake every once in a while like a horse?
Really?
Yep.
Is it worse when it's on the inside or the outside? I assume outside would be way worse for that.
Typically the flies have elsewhere to land outside, but when you walk into a house and they've had access to the body, you're something new and interesting, so they're more apt to come up and fly in your face inside.
Does that hurt your investigation with all the flies there?
Just my feelings.
Okay. Okay. So what happens? So let's say you've done all the processing, you've photographed it, which I can't imagine those photographs. I don't even want to think about the photographs. But you photographed everything. You've got your evidence. What happens next? Does somebody have to come in and haul the body? I shouldn't say it like that, but take the body away?
So the body's actually under the medical examiner's office. So the medical examiner, if the deceased is still on scene, they'll respond, and they conduct their own investigation, but they have custody of the body, so they have their own transport team that collect the body and take it back.
Because you don't touch the body, right?
No.
And that's something I didn't know. I was talking to somebody when I was doing my vehicle training. She was in forensics, and I was asking her all kinds of questions about it, just like I'm asking you to. And one of my questions was about moving it, and she's like, "Oh, we don't really touch it," which I had no idea.
Yeah, with our medical examiner system, which is different from coroner systems if they have it, they have jurisdiction over the body. So we technically, legally aren't supposed to be handling it.
Okay.
So anything that's touching the body, if they're covered with a blanket or anything like that, we cannot move. We can do everything else in the scene. The rest of the scene's ours, but not anything that the body is resting on.
And then eventually they take it away and it'll go to the medical examiner's office and it'll get claimed or not claimed depending on if okay.
If it's an unattended death with not suspicious, but they just don't know what happened, they'll do an autopsy. And then from there they'll release the body to the family if somebody claims it.
So after this portion of your job, do you have to go to court as well?
Yes.
Tell me about that. Tell me about the court process. I'll ask Missy here. How does that work?
I've actually testified in one case so far. It was very nerve-wracking.
Like this podcast.
Well, maybe a little worse than this podcast.
Good. We're supposed to be having fun.
No, this is great.
Good.
No, it's a little nerve-wracking because you're like getting up in front of all these people that you probably never seen before, but it's actually not as bad because you're sitting there and you know what you did on scene and you know why you did it on scene, and you just have to be able to convey that to the jury, and it's usually a lot better once you're done.
What happened in that case? Do you remember? Do you know?
Yeah, I prefer not to talk about that.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
Mikayla might have one for you.
Same as you? Like you've gone to court?
I probably have a record. I went 3 years and 3 months without testifying, so I just testified for the first time.
Okay, how was it?
It was good. It was for a homicide investigation, and they thankfully gave me a list of questions ahead of time, or like generally an outline of what we were going to talk about, because we did a lot more on top of what they were focusing on for this investigation. So it was good. One of the most difficult things is you're supposed to speak to the jury, so the lawyer's across the room talking to you, and then you have to turn away from them and answer their questions to the jury. So you get a lot of back and forth, which is kind of weird and it's very uncomfortable. And you have to speak in a way that the jury understands, so you can't use a lot of technical terms, or if you do, you have to explain it because they won't understand.
Yeah. And so what are the types of questions? Do they ask about the process? Are they trying to I don't want to say trip you up if they're a defense attorney, but are they trying to sort of take away from your process and say maybe it wasn't as accurate as you're saying it is? That's their job. I'm not trying to say bad things about defense attorneys. That's their job.
A lot of what they ask about is more, where was this evidence? Why did you collect it? And what did you do with it? Well, did you get anything off of it? And stuff like that. So it's more of conveying that you did everything you possibly could to this evidence to get the maximum results. So if you didn't get any results, then they're like, well, why didn't you? And you just have to kind of explain that there's not always DNA on every object that's ever been touched. But
do you ever say it's not like TV?
You want to in your head for sure.
So we've talked about homicides in houses, outside. They also happen in vehicles sometimes too. I was down in your area a few weeks ago, and you have a garage there.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
So we have 2 garage bays that we can fit. I think the maximum we've ever had were 6 cars in there.
Wow. All right.
So we shove them in there. But we have the garage bay for our major cases. So our sexual batteries that occurred in vehicles, our homicide investigations, and our deputy-involved shootings. So we bring them back to the office so they're in a more controlled, air-conditioned environment so we can really take our time. Because they don't want us to be out at a tow yard. It's hot. The dust is a big factor there. So you have a little bit of contamination potential. So we have our garage base, so it's more secured and something that we can really focus on.
And it's kind of an eerie scene. Like when I was down there, like you said, they tow the cars in, they put them in there, and they're in the state that they were left in. And this really surprised me. I don't know why it surprised me, but when I was getting this tour, the woman was explaining to me, she was like, they brought it in, this is how it was. And so when you look in, first of all, you know that something terrible happened inside this vehicle, whether it was a homicide or like you said, a sexual battery. But then you look inside and everything is left untouched. So there was like a $5 bill on the ground or on the floor of the car, and there was like a CD coming out of the CD player, and you're like, something terrible happened at this exact moment. And it forever changed somebody's life. Mm-hmm. And it's just like in this time capsule there. And to me, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, we typically, when we have vehicles, particularly for homicides, we almost always have a search warrant. So it's not something that we'll go into and start taking things out of on scene. So it really is as close as possible to how the victim left it. So we actually will, if the doors are open or if they're closed, we'll actually close all the doors and seal them up so that way we know that no one else has been in that car. So when we go back into it, we know that based on my pictures, that's the same. And it really helps preserve as much as possible so that way we can have as much context as possible to recreate what happened.
So, Missy, what do you find rewarding about your job?
Rewarding. It's really great when we can help victims. Like, we can figure out what happened, people can be convicted, and you can give people closure. I think is one of the biggest things. Me personally, I love my job. I love the people I work with. I love that it's interesting every single day. It's going to be something new. It's great.
Have you had instances where you've helped families and they come back and they thank you?
No, I've never had like actual contact with anything like that, but you know that you're helping people.
Yeah.
So
Same for you, Mikayla, or what do you find rewarding about what you do?
It's very similar. Being able to, like, when you get those DNA hits or those latent hits and you know that you've at least put another piece of the puzzle in place to be able to bring that closure to the victim's family, it's very rewarding. Something that you know you're helping them even if you don't have any direct contact.
And so, Mikayla, you've been doing this 3.5 years, you said. Are there any cases that you can talk about that you're particularly proud of? It doesn't have to be a homicide case. I know we've spent the whole time talking about that. But is there anything that you remember sort of coming into and you come to a scene and you're like, all right, we got to figure this out, and you went through the process and you did, and it ended up sort of something good happened at the end, or at least somebody had some closure?
I helped assist with a homicide investigation where the victim was just left on the side of the road, and we were actually able to work back what had happened. So we knew who she was, but we didn't know how she got there, so we did a lot of search warrants. We actually found things in different counties, and we were actually able to piece everything back together, and the 2 people involved were convicted.
Well, I mean, that's got to be a very rewarding thing. And like I said, I know it's tragic, I know it's sad, but you also give some closure to another family that maybe lost a loved one.
Exactly.
So I take it you both are going to do this for a while. It seems like you really like your jobs.
Yeah.
definitely, yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, Missy, Mikayla, thank you so much for coming on Behind the Star. And I look forward to having you back where we can talk about some of the other aspects of your jobs. And thank you all for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Behind the Star. You can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Also, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time, I'm Jon Busdeker, and this is Behind the Star.